Hello and welcome to the Tough Girl podcast, which is all about motivating and inspiring you. I'm your host, Sarah Williams. Today, I'm delighted we're going to be speaking to Emily Chappell, who is a cycle courier that takes on the world. Now, I'm going to let Emily introduce herself and tell us all a little bit more about her and her background. Hi, Emily.
Hello.
How are you doing today?
Very good, thanks.
Very good. So, Emily, if I was to ask you, how would you describe yourself?
That's always a really hard one. I think first and foremost, I'm a cyclist, and everything I've done, all the very different things I've done, have all had a bike involved. So that's probably the easiest way of describing me. And then on top of that, I'd say I'm a cyclist who finds it very hard to sit still and always needs to be doing something that's bigger and better and faster and harder. So I started off commuting in London, like a lot of people do. And that's actually a really good way of getting into cycling because you've got loads of people to race and, you do a few miles every day and your fitness builds up. And then I ended up becoming a cycle courier, which was really what kicked it all off for me. So I did that for probably longer than I should have done. And then I decided to cycle around the world. Didn't actually go the whole way around the world. I spent 18 months crossing Asia, and it was incredible. I could tell you a lot of stories about that. And since then, I've been gradually meandering my way around the rest of the world in ever smaller chunks. So I've done a lot of winter riding. I crossed Iceland and I did Anchorage to Seattle last winter. And I've recently got into ultra-distance racing, which is where you you race your bike, in my case, across Europe, non-stop. So, you just keep going. If you have to sleep, you do, but you try and keep it to a minimum, and doing maybe 200 miles a day, maybe less in the mountains. And that's the latest thing. And I kind of shudder to think what might be next, because I'm not sure what would be bigger than that.
God, absolutely. I mean, the first thing you started off with was the commuting in London. I mean, a lot of people I know who live down in London are actually scared of cycling in London because they almost say it's so dangerous when you do it. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I end up talking about danger quite a lot because most of the things I do, someone comes along quite regularly and says, "Oh, but isn't it dangerous?" And sometimes they say, "Yeah, and you're a woman." But cycling in London, I think everybody thinks it's dangerous. Statistically, it's actually not. And I think people they find it much easier to look at the anecdotes and the emotional responses than they do the actual stats, which say that you're more likely to be injured or killed when walking. And the stuff like London buses kill or maim someone every single day on average. And most of the time that isn't a cyclist. So it's not that bad. And a lot of people, once they actually bite the bullet and decide to do it, have an amazing time because it's really exhilarating. And it's also very empowering. I found before I was just kind of following the tube map round and didn't know where anything was. And if the tube stopped or the bus was late, I was completely screwed and I was always late for things. And on a bike, you end up knowing exactly where you are and exactly how to get to where you want to be. You have a real sense of how everything fits together. And you've got this sense of, I can do it. I can just get on my bike at this place and go to that place. You don't have to rely on anything else.
No, absolutely. Now, you said you became a cycle courier. So did you leave like a professional job to make the change to becoming a cycle courier?
Not exactly. I had the usual few years after graduation where I knocked around. I wasn't sure what I was doing. So I did work I worked in finance for a little while, which I still find hard to believe. Didn't last very long. And I then ended up doing a master's. And it was after that I became a cycle courier, simply because the recession had just hit and there were no jobs anywhere. And that was all I could get. But I'd wanted to try being a courier for ages. I'd always thought they were just so cool. So, and I was a bit addicted to riding my bike even then. So I thought I'd give it a go.
How was it?
I might last 6 weeks. Oh, it was amazing. Well, at first it was exhausting. So my memories of the first few weeks are few and far between, and mostly of tiredness and talking about how tired I was and falling asleep into my dinner every evening. So your world sort of narrows a bit at first. You don't keep up with all your friends because you're asleep whenever you're not on the bike. And then it sort of opened up. And I had even more this sense of kind of excitement and power. And, oh my God, I know this city so well and I know how it works. And I see round all the corners and through all the doors and all the things that other people don't see. And I got hooked on it really, really quickly. And I have this story I drag out quite a lot about how a few weeks in, I was sitting on a park bench and another courier joined me, and he was quite old. He'd been doing it for a while. And he said, yeah, you're not a real courier till you've done your first winter. That's what they say. And so this became my goal. And I thought, right, okay, I'm going to get through November, December, January and February. And then I can call myself a courier and I can say I've actually done it. So I did that. And by then it was too late. It was in my blood and I couldn't stop.
I have to say, the thought of cycling around London in the winter just sounds horrendous. Oh my goodness. So, I mean, to be honest, I'd just be scared. I mean, did you have to almost learn the knowledge like the taxi drivers do so you could know your whereabouts? I mean, how did it almost sort of work?
Well, you don't have to do that in advance. There were one or two companies would give you a bit of a test, but most of it you pick up on the job. And I knew London a little bit. And then the first few weeks I was just constantly reading the A to Z because I realised it's not good enough to just know that something is vaguely west from here. You've got to look at all the streets and the one-way systems and figure out exactly how to get there. So it was quite a steep learning curve. But by the time you've been doing it a few months, it's amazing because you just get on your bike and you go and you don't even need to think about it. You know where the place is. You know how to get there. Someone mentions the name of a street and instantly your brain just kind of, your internal compass fixes on that. And it takes you there and you don't even really need to think about it. And that was pretty good.
That sounds awesome. I love that. Are there many women couriers? Is that quite a popular female choice, or is it, because I'd imagine it would be quite male dominated?
It was male dominated. I will say that it was male dominated, but it was very rarely sexist. And that I really liked. There weren't many women, but the ones there were treated like any other courier. There were a few, like the postroom guys you met and some of the people in the street would maybe, would be a little bit more of a problem. But in the courier industry, you were just treated like a person. And that I really, really liked. But yeah, there weren't that many women. And those that were, I think they really stood out. And most of them were really, really good. And I never completely figured out why that was, but I think it had something to do with, if you're going to be a woman in an industry that's seen as so male, you've got to prove yourself, or you feel you've got to. So people would either drop out if they didn't think they could hack it, or they'd stay and they'd rise to the top quite quickly.
You obviously, you're loving cycling. You've made it through your first winter as a courier. And then when did you decide that you wanted to cycle around the world or do a long distance cycling trip? How did that sort of evolve?
Well, I did 3 more winters. I think I measure my courier years in winters now. And then this would be about, I think it was 2010. I'd always planned I would go back into academia. I wanted to go and do a PhD. And then one day I kind of suddenly realised that plan had just died. I still had it, but I kind of put it down and it just shriveled up and faded away. And I thought, oh, I don't want to do that anymore. Now what? So I spent one summer not knowing what I was going to be doing in the future and thinking I should really have a plan, but also really just living in the moment and having an amazing time and not having to have a plan. And I decided I would, I had a bit of spare money and I thought I'll go and do some bike trips. I'll do the Karakoram Highway and I'll do the US West Coast and just have some really nice kind of adventurous holidays. And then I met up with a friend and her new boyfriend, who's now her husband. I was meeting him for the first time. He knew I was into cycling and he brought along a book for me. And he said, I think you might like this. And it was a book by a guy who had cycled around the world, a man called Alastair Humphreys. And so I took this book home and started reading it. And within a couple of days, I just knew I was going to cycle around the world. And it kind of, the idea was clearly already there because it came into my head very fully formed. So I think it had been there for a long time. And I think I'd always wanted to do something like this and just not had the courage and all that, and not been ready to face up to the fact that this was actually what I wanted to be doing. So I realised I want to do this. and also realised I can do this because look at me, I've been on the bike every day for the last few years. I can do all the basic mechanics. I can handle London. I was still terrified and still spent the year before the trip thinking about all the things that would go wrong and what a terrible time I'd have. But somehow I felt like I could probably give it a go and I was probably going to manage.
So, Emily, cycling around the world is an incredible dream, an incredible challenge to undertake. And you talked about you had the idea, but it hadn't fully formed. And it was about not having the courage and that you were terrified. How did you manage to take those steps and turn it into a reality?
Well, I spent a year planning and preparing. And in hindsight, I didn't need to spend that much time planning, but I'd sort of set my departure date for as far into the future as I could get away with without making it so far that it would never happen. Yeah, so I spent a lot of time going to my local bike shop and buying things and asking questions and telling them how worried I was and being reassured. And I had a lot of lists and, all the rest of it. And I had this big pile growing in the corner of my room that was all the stuff I was acquiring for the trip. And I was trying to get rid of all my possessions as well. So I had another big pile of stuff that was getting smaller. And it was all very, admin and stressful and lists and things. And at the same time, trying to kind of say goodbye to everyone and do as much socializing as I could because I wasn't going to see anyone for a long time. The thing I realise now, and kind of knew even then, I think, is that I was over planning and over preparing. And this is actually something I've seen quite a lot of women do when they decide they want to do a thing like this and they manage to make it happen. By the time they hit the road, they will be more than ready. And I've met so many people on my travels who just thought, oh, I think I might cycle around the world. And 2 weeks later, they're on the road and they've just kind of muddled through. So now the trips I go on, I actually plan a lot less. I've figured out there's a few things you need to get sorted, like things like visas. You need to know, where you're going, that you're allowed to go there and that it's safe and all that nitty gritty. But a lot of it, you're fine. You can sort yourself out as you go along. And as soon as I was on the road, I realised it was quite easy. And also the first few months I was going through Europe, anything I hadn't already bought, I could buy there. So it was, I didn't really need to plan as much as I did.
I think it's quite interesting because I'm sort of the two extremes almost. I either plan everything to within millimeters, and if it's blocks of time, it's like 20 minutes for that, 20 minutes for that. I've got to-do lists coming out of my ears, and I suppose in a way it almost gives me this added confidence that I've done everything that I could possibly do to be prepared. But then there's like that flip side, like you just said, of actually just sort of muddling through and just going for it and just getting out on the road. Can you remember back to when you set off? Where did you start from? Was it Wales you started from?
Yes. So I'm sitting in Wales now in the house I grew up in, and I'm looking out the window and I can see the front garden, which is where I set off from. So my parents' house is the centre of the world. And I set off from here on the 1st of September, 2011. And I did think I was going to do a whole loop of the world and end up back here. And that didn't happen for various good reasons. But that was the symbolic departure.
Can you remember what you were feeling? Was it excitement or nerves, a mixture of both?
It was, the morning I left, it was only excitement. So the week before I left had just been, as you might imagine, incredibly stressful. And I'd actually been ill as well. I'd had some kind of infection that was almost certainly stress related. And just a sort of a cold thing, but I'd been so ill, I thought I might have to delay the start of the trip. And I really didn't want to do that. And then that morning, I woke up and it was all over. All the horrible bit, the waiting and the planning and the stressing was over. And all I had to do was ride my bike. And that's what I love doing. And that's what I do and what I'm good at doing now. And so it was like being released from prison. I just flew down the drive and along the road. And I remember my mother passed me on the road about an hour in on her way to work. And we knew she was going to pass me. And she said she thought I might have taken a different route because I got so far. She kept thinking she'd see me and she didn't. And that day I think I did nearly 100 miles. I went down to Newport and went really fast as well. Couldn't believe I'd covered that distance so quickly and thought, at least I'm still fit, but I'm not going to keep this up. But the the first morning of the trip was, I think, really one of the best days of my life. That feeling of, I've made it happen. The hard bit is before you set off and after you come back. While you're on the trip, it's wonderful and it's quite easy. Everything you have to do is very simple.
Talk us through the trip then. What was your route? How did it go? What were the high points for you?
Oh gosh. Well, something I was going to say a couple of questions ago with the planning thing was I think it's really important with a trip like this or any trip to leave yourself a lot of space for stuff to happen, because the highlights for me were usually the things I hadn't planned and hadn't anticipated. So the first, let me give you the highlights rather than the whole route, because that, we'll be here all night otherwise. The first highlight, I think, was Slovenia, which was a country I'd really not even heard of. I'd heard the name and I knew nothing about it. And I'd cycled across Europe and I'd stayed with a few friends along the way that I knew in various places. And one friend in Germany said, "Oh, you must go and stay with my parents in Slovenia. I've told them about you. They'd really love to meet you." So I passed that way and I had a little bit of time before I was meeting another friend in Croatia. So I did a bit of a loop of Slovenia. And it's just such a beautiful country. It's all these beautiful orchards and vineyards and hills in the east, and then incredible mountains in the north, and a couple of really lovely little cities and a really beautiful coastline. And it's also just, it's hard to explain, but the feel and the nature and the tone of the place, everybody was just very nice and it was comfortable to be there. And I was really happy there. And I've been back there a couple of times since and just felt, yes, this is a place I really like to be. It has good energy. And I would never have gone there. And had I planned my route across Europe, rigorously and said, no, I can't deviate, I would have missed all of that. And further along, I think a lot of the highlights were, so Turkey was another amazing place. Oh gosh, I'm now finding I want to go through every single country and tell you what was amazing about it. And there's no time. Turkey was another place that I didn't really have very many preconceptions about, because I was going through Iran. And Iran, it's quite a big deal. So I was thinking about that and focusing on that. And Turkey was just the place I had to go through to get there. And it turns out Turkey is just brilliant. It's a very, very good place to cycle because there's amazing food. There are very good roads if you look carefully. There's a couple of horrible motorways. But I found a really nice road going down the middle of the country that was a good big road with a good surface, but almost no traffic. And it went through, I think in the east, it went through this place that looked a bit like Monument Valley. It was just these incredible rock formations and long, distant horizons and all of that. And then in the east, I went over the mountains towards Iran. And what I found out before my trip, but hadn't originally known, was that Turkey gets really, really, really cold in the winter. Because you think of it as a southern hot place, but eastern Turkey, it's all way above 1,000 meters. There was one place I stayed was almost 2,000 meters high. And it was as low, I think as cold as about minus 25, which was the coldest I'd ever experienced. And it's funny because when you're traveling at that kind of temperature, it's incredibly hard. And cycling and camping at minus 25 in the snow, it's really, really tough on your body and on your spirits. And I didn't know if I was going to make it. I mean, I didn't think I'd die, but I thought I might give up or something. And it was, I remember riding along one day and my feet were hurting so much that they were hurting all the way up to my ankles. And I could feel my eyelashes freezing together and the hairs in my nose freezing together. And I think somebody had given me they put some boiling water in my water bottles and that froze within an hour. And it was frightening because I'd never experienced that sort of cold. And you sort of think, this feels dangerous. This feels like I'm not supposed to be here and it's trying to kill me and all of that. And I'd have some miserable nights in the tent because I wasn't very well prepared. I had a normal 4-season sleeping bag, which was nowhere near enough. And my sleeping mat was too short, so my feet were just lying on the ground. So I'd wake up during the night several times because I was so cold. And I'd lie there in the morning not having really slept very well and thinking, I really don't want to get up and go out there again, but I don't want to be here anymore. So it was challenging. And what I always imagined was cycling through the Turkish winter. If I made it, I pictured myself as this kind of brave hero striding through the mountains. And the reality was that I did make it, but if you'd seen me, I was this pathetic, shuffling figure riding along at about 6 miles an hour, stopping every few minutes to rest, and just looking like a prisoner on a death march, really. So it was tough. But the really, really weird thing is I remember it as one of the best times of my life. And this is a tendency I have to be very careful of, because the really, really hard periods that you go through on the bike, I always end up looking back and thinking, oh, that was great. I loved that so much. It was so simple and challenging and stark and beautiful. And it was exceptionally beautiful. But at the time, it was very hard. And I keep reminding myself of that, because this habit of rewriting things in hindsight is what makes me go and do them again.
Absolutely. I mean, even just some of the things you said there, the thought of giving up, being frightened because it was so cold, being miserable, sort of lying in your tent, it being really sort of tough on your spirits, and not wanting to be there. I was camping recently, and it wasn't definitely not as cold as -25, but I was lying in my tent debating, I really need the toilet, but it's cold and wet outside, and I'm sure I'd lie there for about 45 minutes thinking, do I get up and go to the toilet, or do I just hold it? What do I do? And
I spent a whole night like that once.
It's amazing how you spend your time. But with those really tough situations, what do you think pulled you through? What do you think kept you going, even though you were stopping every 6 miles? What drove you?
That I am still trying to work out, actually. I'm going to take you forward to another moment a bit later in the trip, where this time I was riding through the Taklamakan Desert in the summer. So I had the opposite problem. It was far too hot. And it actually felt very similar. I was just riding along very slowly, struggling a lot, and thinking, this feels dangerous. I feel like it's trying to kill me. And I spent a day going kind of up a bit of a hill into a headwind in this 40-degree heat. And at one point, I realised I just could not keep pushing and could not go any further, and just sat by the side of the road with my head in my hands, thinking, that's it. I failed, because I can't go any further. I can't cycle around the world. I don't know how I'm going to make it around the world, because I cannot go any more at this moment. So I sat there for a bit. And then I think what happened, it wasn't this kind of moment of great inspiration or anything. It was simply, I started to think about, well, what will actually happen if I give up now? Prosaically, what am I going to do? Do I just sit here until someone comes along and try and hitch a lift or something? Then where do I hitch a lift to? I have to go to some Chinese city. I don't really know. And then, I don't know, do I just book a flight? Do I go home? Do I really want to go home? And then if I do go home, what do I tell people? And sort of thought through all of that. And it also, it sounded quite complicated. And I thought, well, I don't really have the energy to think about that. I think I'll just carry on. And I did, and things always look up. You keep pushing, and eventually things turn around and you find some more energy and you just keep going. And I did keep going and got through it somehow. So partly not giving up is just because giving up itself would be quite hard. And also, a lot of the time it's, I think about what people would think, but I think it's more actually about how I would explain it to myself. How will I live with myself if I give up, when I think secretly I know I could go on if I just toughened up a bit. And there have been things since, like a few rides and things, where I have given up. And sometimes it's been the right thing to do, and sometimes it's been the wrong thing to do. Sometimes I've given in to my lazy impulses, or the little voice that says, oh, come on, you could just stop. Sometimes it's the right thing to do, but it's still very hard. But I think as long as I can kind of step beyond the situation I'm in and think, how are you going to feel about this in the context of your life and your story and yourself? And that could get me through. But a lot of the time, most of the time, giving up is not something I'm thinking about. It might be very hard, but I'm just thinking about, got to keep going, just keep going, just keep going. And the more of this stuff I do, the more I realise if you keep going, it will get better. No matter how improbable that seems, you always feel better eventually.
Absolutely. I was going to say, you actually brought up a really interesting point then, is when you do decide to give up, but you said it was the right thing to do. And I think everyone's been in those situations when they do want to give up and they actually don't. Is it the right thing to give up, or is it the wrong thing to give up? And, no one wants to fail. I mean, I even hate using that. I hate using that word. But how did you know the difference that actually it was the right thing to do? Because sometimes, I mean, for me, I really struggle because I think, am I just being lazy? Like, I literally have this debate, like, do I not want to do this run because I physically can't do it? Or am I just being lazy? And so sometimes, does this make sense? Like, how do you know if it is the right thing to do? Or how did you know it was the right thing to do?
Good question. I think in my case, I usually know it's the right thing to do because I've been in denial about it for a long time, and I'm getting better at recognising the symptoms of denial in myself. So a bit later on, moving forward in this trip, I planned when I got to the end of Asia that I would go straight to Alaska and start riding south down the Americas from there. And because I remembered how much fun I'd had in Turkey in winter, I thought I'd do that in winter because I really enjoyed the cold and the suffering. So that was my plan. And I was going to do that winter 2013. And then I ended up coming home after Christmas that year for various reasons. A close friend had died and I felt like I wanted to be at home. I was missing people, and there didn't seem any point in kind of maintaining this unbroken line if I broke all my ties to my family and friends. So I came home for a bit, and I was still planning to go on to Alaska, carry on riding south. And it got into February and, there wasn't going to be much winter left, but I still wanted to do this winter trip, and I still hadn't booked my flights, and it was going to happen. And at the time I was really not in a very good way. And I was also in denial about that because I was supposed to be happy to be home and supposed to be triumphant that I just cycled across Asia. But I was basically hit with what people call the post-trip blues, but I think was and often is much more serious than that. And I was clinically depressed for about a year, and it was incredibly hard. And the first part of that was just kind of falling into it and also being in denial about the fact that it was going on. And eventually, in about March, I realised that the winter trip was not going to happen. And also that I would be really foolish to go and do it then, because I wasn't very well physically or mentally, and I wasn't in a good shape to go and do an expedition like that, which was going to be very challenging and much harder than anything I'd done before. It would be minus 40 rather than minus 25. So it was quite a big thing to bite off, even in the best of health. And I knew that I shouldn't. I knew it was a bad idea. And eventually I kind of faced up to that. And a couple of years later, I went and did that trip. I did it in winter 2015 instead. And it was incredible. It was in many ways the best trip I've ever done. And it was pretty much as I planned it 2.5 years previously, and as I always wanted it to be, and as I imagined it. And by that point, I was happy and healthy and strong and fit. And I'd also been to Iceland and done a bit of practicing in the snow, and I was completely ready for it. I was still terrified and still felt like I couldn't do it a lot of the time, but I was ready for it, and it went really well. And I look back now and I think if I had tried to do that in 2013, it would have gone wrong. Either something bad would have happened and I wouldn't have been able to look after myself, or, something would have happened to me, or I would have found it too hard and not had the strength to deal with that, and I would have given up and then had to deal with all of that and, with my plan not working out. And that would have been an even bigger blow than, all the depression that was going on at the time. So although giving up and letting go of that plan at the time was really hard and made me feel like a massive failure and a disaster and all the rest of it, I'm so, so glad I did. And 2 years is a long time. I didn't feel like it was ever going to happen back in 2013, but it did, and it was amazing. And I'm now a firmer and firmer believer in looking after yourself. And you're not always you're not always in the best state to do something, but sometimes you are. So if you're not, you know yourself, or you eventually will if you do enough of what you do. So you look at yourself and think, am I really in the best shape for this? Maybe I'm not. Maybe I'll do it next month or next year or tomorrow or whatever it is. Or maybe I'll just, depending on what it is, go out on today's ride and just make it a slow one.
Yeah. I mean, you've touched on so many really important things there. I mean, especially looking after yourself and taking care of your mental health and your physical health. And you talked about, the post-trip blues, which I think a lot of people can recognize. I know when I came back from MDS, I was actually quite down because I'd spent, almost 14 months of my life, getting ready for it, getting strong, doing the planning, doing the preparation. I had a fantastic week out in Morocco. And then suddenly I'd come back and it was like, it's all over. And I know you talked about clinical depression and actually having to deal with that while also letting go of this goal of cycling around the world, which sounds, incredibly challenging. And I think mental health is something that we need to talk about more often and just talk about it. I mean, dealing with that depression over that 2-year time period to get back to that state of healthy, happy, strong and fit, what sort of things were you having to do?
Well, I'm not going to pretend I dealt with it in the best possible way. I've still got a lot to learn on all of that. But I went back to being a cycle courier. And although that's not always the most healthy job to do, it actually really, really helped because it meant I had to get up and get out the house every day. And it filled up the time. So weekends I found really hard because I had nothing to do and I'd just sit in my room and cry and it was awful. But 5 days a week, I would be out in the streets and, seeing people. And I was riding my bike. So I was keeping my fitness up and I was tired so I could sleep. And it actually I think it stopped me from really, really, really hitting rock bottom. I think it could have been worse if I hadn't been doing that. It's one of these things where you have to keep going and keep trying to get better. And I think the thing I realised as well, because I've had a few rounds of depression in my life, that you keep going and you keep trying and you never feel like you're making any progress at all. And then suddenly you start to get better and you realise that you were making progress all the time, but you didn't feel it. And that's something I try to remember now. But I think with all of these things, I think, what I tell people with depression is you have to do everything. So you have to keep yourself not happy, you can't, but, fit and healthy and moving. You have to stay in contact with the people who love you and your friends and family and share it with them and let them support you through it. You have to seek professional help. You have to take the drugs. I didn't that time, but I know I should have. And if you do everything, it will get you through it. But I think something like cycling is just a godsend. It's really, of all the things in my life, I'm so pleased and grateful that I have that, because a few hours on the bike, it turns things round. It gives you new energy and hope, even if only for a little while, really.
Absolutely. I was talking with Nikki Kimball, an incredible ultra endurance runner who's dealt with depression all her life, and one of the things that she talked about was how running has massively helped her. She was very similar to you. She said, it didn't cure her, but she knew that when she was out running, she just felt better in herself because she was doing something active. So you had this time out, and you're working through this, you're throwing everything at it, and then 2.5 years later, you said you went back to have the best trip ever. Could you talk us through what happened in 2015 when you went back where did you start? Did you fly back out over to Canada and start in Alaska? I was going to say my geography's gone then. I was like.
Yeah, I flew to Anchorage, and things were very different by then. So so 2013 was my bad year, and 2014 I was getting back on track. But that whole period turned out actually to be a period of germination, because it was about then that I had agents and publishers start to get in touch with me who'd been reading my blog and say, hey, wouldn't you like to write a book about some of this? And I ended up selling a proposal to write a book about being a cycle courier. So during 2014, I was doing that. I was still working as a courier and I was working on the book, and it was all a bit full on. And then I finished the first draft of the book on Christmas Eve 2014, stood up from my desk and went off to the airport and flew off to Alaska for a complete 3-month break from all of that. So it was a real kind of a contrast of being hunched at my desk for months and then suddenly being out on the bike. So got to Alaska and set off from Anchorage on not New Year's Day, because I thought I'd have a hangover then. So I set off on the 2nd of January and started riding north. And it was, I was on a fat bike by then. I don't know if you've come across them. It's kind of like a mountain bike, but with super thick tyres, so about 4 inches. It looks like a tractor. And it's a great bike to ride because everyone wants to talk to you because they want to find out what this crazy bike is. So it's a good way of making friends. But there weren't many people out in Alaska. So the first day I was riding on a highway out of Anchorage. So there were cars passing, Anchorage is the biggest city in Alaska. So there were people around, but it was already cold and snowy and frozen and really hard going. And the bike was heavy, the gearing was low, it was very slow, and I was riding into this very cold wind. So it was only 45 miles that day. I was staying with a friend of a friend in Wasilla, but it took me all day, and I was just pushing into this horrible cold wind the whole day, thinking, I really don't think I'm going to make it. I've got a very long way to go. And if I can only cover 45 miles in a day, and I'm finding it very, very hard, but I had no option but to keep going. So the following day I set out and carried on riding north, and it got colder and colder and whiter and whiter. So the road was all sort of frosty. And then after a day or so, it was just covered in snow. And the mountains around me were getting whiter and whiter. And the temperature kept dropping. And because of the temperature inversion, the cold air all sinks down into the valleys. So every time I went down a hill, it was kind of like when you walk into a shop in summer and the air conditioning hits you. And I was frightened, like properly frightened, and just had this feeling of really, really shouldn't be here, really, really should go back, should stop, really, really just, and it was, I think, almost a primitive thing, just my body and my mind were trying to get me to stop doing this thing that felt so dangerous. I mean, I know it's not. That's the thing. I know people go to the poles and people walk across Greenland. So I knew that this was okay, really. But I couldn't stop myself feeling frightened. And there were fewer and fewer people as well. So I just felt like I was going off into the great unknown. Although this was a road and there were people living along the road, admittedly not very many. So the first few days were, I think, psychologically quite difficult. But then I started, as I always do on my travels, I started having these magical encounters where I would just meet someone against all the odds, and they would take me in and invite me to meet their family and look after me and give me a warm bed and things like that. And one of the best ones was, I think I'd been on my own for quite a while, and I saw this guy going along the other side of the road, along the verge, on a snowmobile. And it was quite a shock to both of us because neither of us were expecting to see another human being. And there weren't very many cars on this road. So he stopped to have a chat. And he said, well, I'm staking out the course for a dog race that's going through this weekend. Why don't you come and stay with us and you can help out on the checkpoint? And it was this massive dog race with all these huskies and sleds and things. And I spent a weekend staying with these wonderful, very kind people. They had a lodge a few miles up the road, and helping out on the race, feeding all the racers who were coming in, and meeting all the dogs and the teams. And all of these local people kind of came out of the woodwork, because you go through this landscape and think there is no one here. And then there were hundreds of people suddenly this weekend, and they'd all driven for hundreds of miles from all these scattered little homesteads about the place. So I realised that there were people there. There was community and civilization and all of that, and started to kind of warm up to it a bit more and be fascinated by it, because these people were living fairly lives not that different from mine, just with the context of this incredible cold and isolation and having to drive 5 hours to the supermarket and things like that. So I carried on into Canada, and I mean, I could go into a lot of detail. You should probably ask me some more directed questions. I had a lot of, I don't know, the usual highs and lows, especially of temperature. So I think I camped at -40 a couple of points, and that was
that sounds horrendous.
That was quite challenging.
Oh my goodness!
It was easier than Turkey, I think. I had much better equipment, and that made a huge difference. I'd like to say it was about my toughness and preparation, but it was actually just about having 2 really thick sleeping bags, 2 sleeping mats, and a really good tent.
Do you know, I can really imagine. I'm quite a visual person, so when you were describing, cycling down these roads into the valleys and it getting colder and colder and colder, I mean, how you kept going, I don't know. I mean, just a couple of questions from that. I mean, one of the things that you talked about was the loneliness and also the isolation factor when you're out in these places. And is this something that you just learn to cope with? Is it something that you embrace, something that you enjoy? How do you cope with that?
I think I mostly enjoy it. I get asked this quite a lot, and in some ways I don't even really properly understand the question, because I don't really get lonely when I'm out there on the road. I don't know, it's the ultimate me time. I really enjoy being out there on my own. It would be different if there was someone else there. And on that particular trip, I actually had a GoPro that one of my sponsors had lent me to get some footage. And I was supposed to be turning it on and, getting footage of me riding down the road. But I found I really didn't want to, because as soon as I turned it on, it felt as if somebody was there, and I didn't want anybody to be there. I was enjoying having this place to myself. And I think the isolation, it's funny because I started off being very scared of it, and sometimes still am. And even bizarrely, even in the UK sometimes, there's some parts of even some places in Wales in the mountains where I can go and feel this sense of slight fear, because you are a very long way from anywhere. If you want to get to the next town, it's 2 hours ride or something, and there's just nothing out there, not even a house. But then it's also exciting and amazing because you have this place all to yourself. It's just you in the middle of this incredible landscape. And so later on in my winter trip, and I went down through Canada, and I deliberately took some roads that were even more deserted because I wanted to experience that. I really, really enjoyed it. I loved having the place to myself and knowing that it was maybe, it might be 20, 30 miles before I saw any sign of human habitation, and then it would be a boarded up house or something. But also, I think the loneliness, I do get lonely sometimes, and it more often hits me when I get to a place where there are people, and suddenly I feel like I don't really fit in, and I have to figure out how the world works again, and that can be quite isolating. When I got to Hong Kong after being in China for 3 months, I couldn't really communicate in China at all, so I was very, very isolated there. So when I reached Hong Kong, there were people who spoke English, and there were lots of things that reminded me of home. And that was when the loneliness and the homesickness hit me. And I realised that, I had all these things to say and no one to say them to, and I hadn't really had a chance to talk to anyone for months. But I think while I'm in the middle of it, it's always fine. You're there in the zone and you're dealing with it, be it the loneliness or the physical challenge or anything. You keep yourself going. And then it's when you get to the end, or when you get to a point where you can kind of relax a bit, that whatever it is starts to hit you.
I think it also shows, sometimes I quite enjoy being alone, and I really appreciate my own company. And I think that's when it's when you're comfortable with yourself, and you actually don't need to be around other people. Don't get me wrong, I think it's good to socialize, but actually being able to spend time on your own, I think, is a really great trait, and it's a good skill to learn. With all your cycling that you've done, from cycling from Wales over to Japan, and then spending 3 months cycling from Anchorage to Seattle, what do you think you've learned most about yourself from doing those long trips?
Oh gosh, I'm not sure if I have a good answer to this, because a lot of people I know who've done trips like this say, oh yes, you learn a lot about yourself when you're out there. And I've never felt like I'm learning a lot about myself, though I think I probably am. am. I think something I've realised in the past year or so, because I've started doing these big races, which just are using all the experience I have and turning it into competitive form. And I've realised I can handle it. Whatever comes up, I can handle it. And although I spend a lot of my time feeling like I can't and I'm stupid and pathetic and all of that, I really, really can. And, I'm capable and I can do things. And I don't know if that's a thing I realise about myself, but I don't know. And I think also part of knowing you can handle it is knowing how you work. So I've just figured out the way I work when I'm on the road, the times of day where I'm better, the types of terrain where I'm better or worse, and, where my high and low points are, and where the dangerous points are, where I start to feel weak and tired and then think, oh, maybe I should give up. And so you learn how to kind of nurse yourself through the hard points and anticipate them and deal with them. And then when you're having a good period, to really maximize it. So I don't know if I've learned anything very profound about myself, but I've got to know myself very well.
Which I think is so important. So you talked about the big races, the getting competitive, and last summer and this summer you competed in the Transcontinental Race. I mean, I think maybe if you could just maybe introduce the race and tell everybody what the race is and what your experience was back in 2015. Was 2015 you did the first race?
Yes.
Yeah. If you could just talk us through that, I think that'd be fascinating.
So the Transcontinental is a race across Europe, and I think it sort of has its roots in the same place as the Tour de France, just this, the original Tour de France, the idea of just seeing how far people can go on bikes over crazy distances. It's a non-stop race, and it goes from Belgium to Turkey, so right across Europe. And riders are allowed to pick their own route. You just have to go through 4 different checkpoints. And that makes it really interesting. So they put all the checkpoints in difficult places, like on top of mountains. But in between the checkpoints, you can go where you want, which means it's not just about strength and speed. It's also about kind of strategy and how well you've done your planning and what you might know about the route and all of that. So it's not just a race. It's this big sort of collection of challenges. And there's a lot of different people do it from different cycling backgrounds. And while you're doing the race, the clock never stops. So you go as long as you can, you sleep as little as you can, because, every hour you sleep, your competitors might be riding. And one of the most crucial things about it is that it's completely self-supported. So there are no team cars, there's no backup crew. You're not allowed to have your friend coming to meet you with food, or, your wife coming with a camper van or anything like that. You are completely on your own. You're allowed to use hotels and bike shops and anything that's open to everyone you can use, but you've got to do it on your own. If a problem comes up, you've got to fix it yourself. And that is, I think, what really sets it apart.
And tell us about, what was your experience like in 2015 doing the race? I mean, is it quite... what's the ratio of sort of men and women? Because I think it's quite male... Well, I imagine it is male-dominated.
It is indeed male-dominated. And the Transcontinental is actually slightly more male-dominated even than other races of its sort, which I'm still trying to figure out, because I really want other women in it, because I want some competition. So the first year I did it, I think there were 3 women doing it as solos. There were 2 women doing it as a pair, and there were maybe 2 or 3 others doing it as a pair with a man. And only 1 woman made it to the end, and it wasn't me. It was one of the female pair. The other one dropped out, and all the other 3 of us who were doing it solo didn't last the course. So I had, with most of the things I want to do, I'd been in denial about my interest in this race for quite a long time. And I was finally talked round by Juliana Boering, who is a friend, and she's one of the world's best ultra racers. She's got the record for going around the world very fast and quite a lot of other things. So she talked me into it, along with a few other people. And by the time I got to the start of the race, I actually felt really good. I'd had a very good year on the bike. I'd just done the Alaska thing. And then I'd spent the whole summer just riding crazy distances on a road bike. And I'd realised I'd got fast. And I just felt like I was on this massive wave of success and realizing I was capable of more than I thought. And it was a really good year, that. And I was in the race for 8 days and actually really enjoyed most of it. It went really well. It was like cycle touring, but just with the volume turned right up. So you're doing much bigger distances, you have to eat more, you're sleeping less. And it was, I was better at it than I thought, and I enjoyed it more than I thought. And then I got over the Alps into Italy, and I decided that sleep was for wimps, and I was just going to keep going and not sleeping, because the guys who were winning, they were sleeping just 20 minutes a day, and I should be doing that. And I kind of, I got a bit anorexic with sleep. I was kind of obsessing over it, but not allowing myself any, and riding along, looking at places where I could sleep, but saying, no, you can't, you're weak, you're lazy, you must keep going. And that was never going to end well. So I kept going for quite a few days, and then inevitably ground to a halt completely, and passed out for a few hours in a guest house in Slovenia, lovely Slovenia, and woke up with these chest pains, which I had actually had before a few times and been kind of ignoring because I didn't really want to think about what they might be. But at this point, I was at such a low ebb and I was so vulnerable and had no resilience left because of what I'd just done to myself, that I decided this was a good time to listen to the chest pains. And so I ended up in hospital with some very confused doctors who were like, how far? Really? But you don't sleep? Really? Really? So that was fun. And they checked me out, and there were, I didn't have a heart problem, I didn't have a lung problem, so that was all okay. It was probably my intercostal muscles, but they told me to stop racing. And by then I think I knew I was out of the race. I didn't actually feel too bad about it, because it's weird, I can't quite figure that out. I'd already achieved way more than I thought I could on that race, and I'd realised that although I'd kind of messed up with the last few days, this was something I thought I could be good at. And a lot of the guys on the race, there's quite a lot of Twitter activity during the race, and a lot of the guys were just complaining all the time about their saddle sore and their sore backs and their feet and their blisters and their sunburn and how badly everything was going and how miserable they were. And I had that stuff going on, but I was really having a good time. And when I wasn't riding along crying, I was riding along singing. And so I knew this was something, there was never any question I was going to go back and do it the following year.
And what happened when you went back there? Well, this year.
This year, yeah, last month, in fact. Mm-hmm. Well, to cut a long story short, I won.
Yay!
It was I won the women's category, not overall, and I still there are women winning races like this, so I don't think I could ever beat some of the guys who are in this race, but it is possible. One day a woman will win the Transcontinental. So yeah, I won the women's category. There were quite a few women in it this year, and there was some really good competition as well. So Jane, who was the surviving member of the pair last year, who finished, she was in it again. And there was a woman called Johanna from the Netherlands who came in second, and quite a few others. It went really well. It's almost quite a boring story. I feel it's a lot more interesting when you have challenges and failures. But it was quite a clean run. So the run up to the race, I was very stressed and miserable, as you always are. And the week after, I was quite stressed and miserable with getting back to real life, because that's how it works, I realised. The build-up and the aftermath are the really hard bits. The race itself, or the ride, or the expedition is usually fine because you're doing it. And as soon as the race started, it started at 10 p.m. in Geraardsbergen in Belgium, and there were all these flaming torches and cowbells, and the whole town came out to see us off. And then we just rode off into the darkness of Belgium and northern France. And I just felt like, right, this is it. I'm on my bike. This is what I do, and I just need to keep doing it. And so I did, and we went into the Alps, and they really made it difficult this year. So there were 2 checkpoints, sort of in the east and the west of the Alps, which meant you had to go pretty much straight through the middle. So for I think it was 3 days, I was doing basically 4 alpine passes a day, and I had honestly, my legs had never felt that tired. I have quite strong legs now, and they were exhausted, and I was amazed that they could keep going. You know, you'd finish one pass and think, right, that's it, I think I might have to stop now. And then you'd manage to do another one and then another one. And I think the worst day was actually the day I came out of the Alps and rode across northern Italy and Slovenia. My legs were they were really swollen, and I couldn't really turn the pedals very hard. I just had to gear down and spin. But what I'm learning, and I think what my big lesson was for this race, was that I think I got through it and did well by looking after myself during it. So I was really careful about all the little housekeeping things. Like, I always wash my shorts every day. I had 2 pairs and I changed them every day, because saddle sore doesn't sound like a big deal, but it really, really is if you're suffering. And I tried to stretch on the bike a lot, and I did all of that stuff. And I ate very well. So I ate a lot, but I also ate, you know, a lot of fruit, a lot of meat, a lot of cheese, a lot of carbs. You know, tried to get all the food groups in and get them in well, and drank plenty and all of that. And then mentally as well, when things were going well, I would think, right, okay, look, things are going well. Excellent. Well done, you. Keep going. Let's try and go a bit faster. Let's make the most of this, because this is a good patch. And then a bad patch would happen. And I'd think, okay, well, you know, you've done a lot of this. You know you get bad patches. So let's just keep rolling. You don't have to go very fast, but just keep going. And then if it got really, really, really bad, I would stop and have a sleep. And I learned, even during the race, I was learning, if I was in a really bad mood and feeling really down on myself, if I slept for a few hours, I'd always feel way better. And so just little things like that, you learn how to keep yourself going, because it was nearly 2 weeks by the time I finished. You can't be out there for that amount of time if you're pushing yourself too hard and letting things slip, because you will grind to a halt. You've got to just boringly keep yourself going and sustain yourself to get through it.
Absolutely fantastic. First woman in, it took you 13 days, 10 hours, 28 minutes. And what an absolutely awesome result. And do you know what I'd be really interested in as well is, what do you think it can be done to encourage more women to enter long distance cycling races like the Transcontinental?
This is a really good question, and this is the question I am currently asking everyone. So I don't know, your guess is as good as mine. I am trying constantly to try and encourage people in all the ways I can think of. Some of that is just writing very frankly about my experiences, and often showing people that to do something like this, you're not actually this kind of invincible hero figure. You actually lay yourself bare, and all your kind of your cowardice and your pettiness and your laziness and everything, you have to face up to it. But it's all still there, and you know, you're terrified a lot of the time. You don't have to change as a person to do a thing like this. And that's something I still feel. I look at things and think, well, those people who do that, I mean, they're different people, and they're not. We're all the same. And I think particularly with the Transcontinental, I think there's a lot of sort of apprehension around the fact that it goes through all these different countries that might be challenging in all sorts of ways, and you know, culturally difficult with language or something. And I'm getting more and more angry about the fact that women are very explicitly told, you know, this is dangerous. Foreign travel is dangerous. You know, people who speak a different language are dangerous. Because I get told and asked that all the time, and it's simply not true. But I think for me, it's okay because I've been through these places before, and I know it's fine. But I think even if I tell people, it's still quite a big hurdle to get over to believe they really will be fine. And I think a lot of women are just more cautious than a lot of men, and that can be a really good thing. So I don't know. I am also just trying to kind of to bully as many women as I can into entering these things. So I think the entries for next year's race open in I think a couple of months. So I want to try and get lots of people together over the next few months, like women who've done this sort of thing, and women who want to next year, and women who think, oh, I never could, and you know, I'm not that sort of person, but maybe I'd be interested one day, and just get them, I don't know, sitting in a pub or a coffee shop and talking about it, because I think that really helps as well. In fact, that's what did it for me, was sitting in a pub with Juliana and a couple of other ultra racers, and talking to them and them saying, just do it. I think you'll be fine.
So if people are wanting to do it, what would be the best way for them to get in contact with you or to find out about this meeting in the pub or about having this conversation? Where would be the best place for them to go?
Well, I think the best way to get in touch with me directly is through my website, and there's a contact form there. Or you can find me on Twitter. It's at Emily Chappell. And I'm really, really happy for people to get in touch, because I feel like this is one of the most important things I can do. If I can actually just answer a few questions and help convince people that they could do this, then I would love to. So yes, please get in touch. No matter how unqualified you think you might be, because I thought I was a couple of years ago.
Absolutely. And what I'll do is I'll make sure I put all the links to the website, to your Twitter handle in the show notes. You can just go on there and get in contact straight away. So that will be easy enough to do. Now, I'm very conscious of time, so I don't want to keep you on too long. But I know you're part of the Adventure Syndicate, and I'd love for you just to explain what that is, how it came about, and what you do.
Okay, so the Adventure Syndicate, it's a very new thing. We've just started it this year, and it's just taken off, and we almost can't keep up with it, which is wonderful. And it came about when a few of us were pretty much sitting around whinging about the bike industry and how it wasn't really getting it right with regards to women, and it wasn't catering for us, and it was trying to squeeze us into niches we didn't really fit into. And then we eventually realised, well, we have quite a lot of power and influence between us. You know, a couple of them were professional athletes and so forth. Maybe we could just sort this out ourselves. And so the Adventure Syndicate came to be. So we've got a few aims. One of them is we want to promote this very diverse and powerful alternative role model, to say that to be a cyclist or an athlete or an adventurer or a woman, you don't necessarily have to look like this or this or this, and you don't have to look like me. You could look like any of the others and be like us and act like us or not. You know, so there's a lot of different ways of doing your thing. And we also want to very, very practically get alongside people and help them figure out what's limiting them and what's stopping them from doing what they want to do, be it cycling to work or cycling around the world. Because I don't ever want to be one of those people who just has an inspirational Instagram account and thinks, I aim to inspire people, but all you're doing is producing content. You've actually got to get alongside people and meet them and talk to them and go for a ride with them. So we're trying to do a lot of that. We've just done, we've run one bike packing course so far in the Highlands, and just a couple of days ago, we finished an 8-day ride. I was there for 2 days of it, of the North Coast 500 in Scotland, with 10 women who had come along because they wanted to do that with a group of other women. Maybe they, I don't know, were nervous about riding alone or nervous about camping alone, or just thought it would be more fun to do it with other people. So we're going to do a lot more of that sort of thing. And we've got a big program of talks and workshops and other events planned for the next 6 months all over the UK. So what we want to do is actually meet people and find out from the horse's mouth what it is they need and how we can help. And so far, it seems to be going really, really well. And we're quite excited about what the future holds.
Absolutely. And I love the website. So if you go to the website, theadventuresyndicate.com, you can find out loads of information. There's loads of details about the women involved, such as Emily. There's Juliana Buring, who's also been on the Tough Girl podcast. There's also Sarah Ooten, who's involved, who you can also listen to on the Tough Girl podcast. So absolutely fantastic what you're doing. And what is next for you? What's going to be your next challenge?
Well, for me, already I am looking forward to the Transcontinental next year, because one of the beauties of the race is that the checkpoints change every year. So you can always go back and do it again. It's not like you're going to get bored of the same course, and there's always going to be new challenges. So I'm looking forward to that.
I was just going to quickly ask, and how long do you get to plan and prepare for the race? When does the route come out?
So the checkpoints are announced. Last year it was the end of October, so it'll be round about then. And that gives you, 9 or 10 months to plan and prepare and research your route, and even do a recce as part of the route if you want to. the first year I was a bit seat of the pants with that, but this year I planned a bit more, and next year I will plan even more. And then in the future, I had this really bad idea on day 11 of the Transcon. I was riding along, feeling really good, having a lovely day, and thinking, I'm getting into my stride now and it's almost over. It should be twice as long. And thinking, what could I do that's a bit longer than this so I can spend even more time out in this very intense, brilliant, beautiful environment on my bike? And I thought, well, no one's had a go at the round the world record since 2012. So maybe I could try that. And then thought, oh no, now that I've thought of that, I'm going to have to.
And is that Juliana's
maybe
record?
Even do it. Yeah.
Amazing.
So that's hers. It stood for a long time, and she said if I ever wanted to do it, she would very happily support me, because it's about time someone had a crack at it.
Absolutely. No, I just recently spoke with Juliana as well. Actually, I spoke to her today, recording her interview for the Tough Girl podcast. So she's got an absolutely fascinating story as well. But oh my goodness, that sounds absolutely amazing. When do you think you'll confirm if you're going to start that?
Oh gosh, I've talked about it too much now.
You've said it. You've put it out there.
Yeah, I know. I've actually told quite a few people, which might just mean, it doesn't happen. It could be a damp squib and not come to anything. It will be 2018 at the earliest, and by then someone might have set a record I could never break. So we'll see about that. But the reason I want to do it, I've thought about it a lot, because I kind of think it's the kind of thing I could do, but I don't really care very much about setting a record. And if it were just for that reason I was doing it, I would probably give up, because honestly, I don't care enough. It would just be a tick in a box. What made me think I'd like to do it was the thought of being out there for longer and doing something even bigger and even harder. And that, I think, would be the reward. So I know I'd get to the end of it and maybe get the record and kind of think, all right. But it would be the 3 or 4 months, however long I spent actually doing it, that would be the bit I'd be interested in. So we'll see about that. I might find some other challenge that is big enough to keep me going. But if that happens, it'll be 2018 or sometime thereachafter.
It sounds absolutely fascinating. I have no doubt whatever challenge you go after, that you will give it your all and achieve it. You've just got that mentality. You're such an inspirational role model. And thank you so much for coming on the Tough Girl podcast and for sharing so much of your life and your experiences, your high points, your low points, what drives you, what you've learned along the way. I think what you're doing with the Adventure Syndicate is absolutely fantastic, and I know the Tough Girl podcast will be 100% behind that, as will all of the listeners, and I'll be putting all of the information in the show notes. But Emily, thank you so much for being an awesome guest on the Tough Girl podcast.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Happy Tuesday, tribe. I hope you are having a fabulous day. I really hope you enjoyed the episode. I was absolutely transfixed by Emily's story and also her voice. She's such a good storyteller that I just wanted to keep on asking her questions. But if you're into your cycling and you want to be inspired by more women, then go and take a listen to Juliana Bering, who we interviewed last week, and she cycled around the world. Phenomenal story, well worth listening to. There's Rochelle Olsen, who also cycled 5,000 kilometers all the way through North America. You've got Anna McNuff, who did her massive cycle ride through America, as well as Sophie Radcliffe, who did the first Alpine to Alpine. There's also Catherine Bertine as well, another incredible female cyclist. So there's lots of cyclists on the Tough Girl podcast, so go and check them out. I'm sure I say this every week, but thank you so much for all of your support. I appreciate it so much. Make sure that you've hit that subscribe button, and if you liked what you're listening to, then please do leave a review wherever you listen to it, in iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, or on YouTube. Leave a review, and if I could just ask you one thing, please do tell a friend about it. Tell somebody whose family, tell a work colleague, tell somebody that you go running with, tell somebody in your gym class. Just spread the word about the Tough Girl podcast. I really appreciate it. And I want stories like this, of Emily's story, to get out there, to inspire more women to get involved with the world of cycling or to get fit and active. If you've got any ideas and suggestions that you think could help Emily to encourage more women to be involved in these types of cycling races, please do reach out to her. Please do send her an email. I know she'd absolutely love it. All of the links will be on the Tough Girl website, so toughgirlchallenges.com. I'd also love to hear from you guys. I love your feedback. Do you like what you're hearing? Do you want more types of questions answered? Do you want more cyclists, more runners, more explorers, more travelers, more athletes? What sort of women do you want me to interview? I always love getting your suggestions, and I always will try and reach out to those women to get them on the podcast. Obviously, at the moment, I'm only doing one episode a week. So actually every year I can only interview 52 women, but I am trying to increase that. I hope you've heard about Tough Girl Extra, which is something I just started recently, really. And what I wanted to do was to speak to previous Tough Girls who've been on the show and just catch up with them, see what they've been up to. So I've spoken to Emma Timmis, and she talked more about her trip to the Dolomites and also her walking tour when she was over in Australia, the Australian Alpine walking track, which was brutal from the sounds of it and also from watching the videos. We also shared more about our Hadrian's Wall challenge, which was so much fun, which we did at the end of August. Most recently as well, we spoke to Jo, who summited Mount Everest. Absolutely fascinating story, well worth listening to and going back to find out more about that. It is coming to the end of September, and to be honest, I just can't believe it. I don't know where the time has gone. But have you thought about what your challenge is going to be for October? Have you got a challenge that you're working towards or that you need help or support with? If you do, come and join the Tough Girl tribe. Come and share it with us, and we can help you. We can support you. And that is what the tribe is all about. It's a closed Facebook group for the listeners of the Tough Girl podcast. It's a way for listeners around the world to connect with other listeners. It's a way to get support. It's a way to get answers. It's a way to get help, whatever your questions may be. No matter how silly you think those questions are, there'll be somebody who will have thought of the same question but has been too scared to ask it. Well, if you are scared to ask questions, then just come to the Facebook group and ask away. It's a very, very supportive environment, and I couldn't be prouder of everybody who's in it. October is going to be an awesome month. So just a couple of things to mention. There's going to be the Women in Venture Expo, which is going to be happening in Bristol on the 8th of October. I'm going to be attending, and I'm so looking forward to it. I know loads of the Tough Girl tribe are going to be there as well. So that will be absolutely fantastic. You can only get your tickets up until the 30th of September. So if you haven't got your tickets, please go and get them. They're priced at around £35, but it's such an amazing value for getting to listen to these women and to network and connect with like-minded individuals. I'll also be arranging a meetup as well the night before for the listeners of the Tough Girl tribe. So to find out about that, please do join the Facebook group. That weekend as well, there's also the Commando Challenge, which is happening on the 9th. So this is an obstacle course race, which is going to be absolutely fantastic. The Tough Girl tribe is going to be a small team of us. There's going to be about 4 of us heading down. It's being held, I think, down in Devon, and it's going to be fun. So we're doing the 10-kilometer course, an OCR, so obstacle racing, and it's going to be muddy, it's going to be dirty, and it's going to be cold, but it's going to be fun. And yeah, we're really looking forward to it. And then later on, there's also Yestival. I'm sure you've heard of the Yes Tribe, but this is a festival, so Yes and Festival mixed together, which takes place on the 21st to the 23rd, and I'm actually going to be one of the speakers, and I'm going to be sharing more about my own personal journey, as well as sharing what I've learned from interviewing so many incredible women on the Tough Girl podcast. I've now interviewed maybe over 75 women now, and I have learned a huge amount, and hopefully you have too. If you've been subscribed and you've been listening, I hope you've picked up the tips and the advice and applied them to your own life. I know it's certainly opened my eyes about what is possible and what you can do and what you can achieve. And that really is the purpose of the Tough Girl podcast, to motivate and inspire all of you. So thank you again to all of my amazing patrons who have been supporting me. Absolutely phenomenal. It's amazing having that support behind me. If you want to become a patron of the podcast, then please do go and check out the links. They're all on the website, toughgirlchallenges.com. Please do send me a tweet, which is obviously my name, Sarah Williams, at _tough_girl, all in capitals. Have an amazing week, everybody. I cannot wait to connect with you again next Tuesday for another awesome episode of the Tough Girl podcast. And if it doesn't challenge you, it doesn't change you. So make sure you are pushing yourself. Make sure you are challenging yourself. Make sure that you are growing and learning and developing. Awesome. I will speak to you soon. Take care. Bye.